Okay, we're going to go ahead and start it. Thank you for joining us for what is going to be maybe the last for a while webinar. If you haven't already received the save the date, June 24th, we're going live. It will be a hybrid opportunity. So depending on where you're at and your comfort level, you'll be able to join us at the Hotel Zaza in person with appropriate precautions, or we'll be doing a live streaming of the proceedings. So you'll have both opportunities, or if you can only be there for part of the time, it'll start with the Clarence Darrow Award going to Dean Gary Bledsoe, the longtime president of the NAACP, who's going to be introduced by Senator Royce West. And we already have and anticipate sending out the agenda of very top-notch speakers from across the country engaged in our brave new world as we emerge from the virus. So today we get a all-star panel talking about what's been going on what is often not paid enough attention to, given how many Harris County residents are impacted by what's going on in the criminal courts. Our start will be Commissioner Rodney Ellis, who has the unique, I think it's fairly unique, privilege of having served both in city council, state government as a longtime senator, and now as a commissioner for Harris County. We all know how much he's been involved directly, both in the bond issues and the indigent defense issues that are starting already, having had the opportunity to review the monitor's report from the bond issue, are already having a on the ground directly every single day, every single night impact on how folks charged with crimes are treated in our court system and the level of care that is being taken to make sure that their constitutional rights for a change are being fully respected to the extent possible. Thank you for joining us, Commissioner Ellis, and just a flag for everybody, go ahead and get questions up for him quick, because after he finishes talking about his overview, we're going to go ahead and spend some time on questions with him as opposed to the end. We'll still have an opportunity at the end, but if you have questions on the issues for him, please get those in the chat function as soon as you can. Thank you, Commissioner Ellis.
Thank you, and I'm proud to be back with you, and I'm proud of the work that you do. I think that being here in the home of George Floyd, we have a responsibility during this period of racial reckoning in our country to do as much as we can, as quickly as we can. I saw an article, a headline not too long ago that said that Tarrant County was the largest county in the country that did not have a public defender system. And it was not that long ago, people would say that about Harris County. And of course, we have the distinction of being the death penalty capital of the country, if not the world as well. The reason I'm leaving early is because I'm trying to name a park after Reverend Bill Lawson, who was so key in getting Harris County to create a public defender's office. He's 92 years old, and I want to meet him out there at Adair Park, where we're looking at naming a detention pond after him next to it. But look, I want us to go even farther than what we have done with our indigent defense system in terms of reforming it. I've asked Jim Bethke, who is the head of the county's Justice Administration Department, to work with Geoff Burkhart to come up with a holistic indigent defense plan for Harris County. I was one of the people with many others who helped lead the effort to get a public defender's office in Harris County. When I became a commissioner 4.5 years ago, that office was handling about 6% of the cases. Here we are now, roughly 11 years after having finally created a public defender's office, and that office handles about 11, slightly under 12% overall of the cases. Don't divide misdemeanors and felonies, but overall, that office handles about 11.5, almost 12% of the cases 11 years later. So that growth is, not quite 2% a year, about 1% a year. We can do better than that. And I think we ought to look at, in addition to following through on the commitment we made on the afternoon of George Floyd's funeral, to increase the public defender's office so that it can handle 50% of the cases in 2 years. That was the commitment Commissioner's Court made on the afternoon of Mr. Floyd's funeral a year ago. Here we are now at about 11%. I think we ought to, in addition to the great office that Alex Bunnan has, we need to have an alternate public defender's office. And I think we need to get our MAC up and running. I have always been adverse to the notion of the judge who is hearing a case, picking the lawyer for someone who is accused of a crime in their court. I don't think many of us on this call would let one of our loved ones, God forbid, they come into conflict with the criminal justice system. I don't think we'd let the judge pick their lawyer. And I don't think we ought to let that be the case for people who are indigent. And so I'm hoping that our judges, whichever party they are in, will agree to a holistic system. I think it's time for us to do that. And I'm going to push that very vigorously. And I hope that this organization in particular will be a part of that. A lot of people who are now saying they're glad we have a public defender were not visible when that battle was going on. And it was a battle to get a public defender's office in Harris County. And we had all those horror stories of sleeping lawyers. I think when Mr. Burkhart goes to the principals, he'll explain the concept even better than I will. I'll make this brief comment as well. The misdemeanor bail reform settlement is going well. You can look at the interim report that has come in from the monitor, which shows that it is a challenge for our judges because they cannot talk about individual cases when they're criticized over the bail reform system. Many people who are detractors will conflate paid bail and they will conflate misdemeanor bail with felony bail. That's by design. There are a lot of people who make money off of other people's misery. And this system is racist, it's unfair, it's inequitable, and it's been in place for so long because so many good people were not willing to stand up. I'm proud of the advances that we've made. There are challenges along the way. We didn't end up with the Willie Horton system coming out of all places, progressive town of Boston, by the way, by accident. It's very difficult for people to weigh in on these issues. I'm proud of that Justice Administration Department. We got to improve our pretrial services and monitoring system in Harris County. We got to put more money in it as a part of it. We have criminal justice challenges all around the country. Crime is going up virtually everywhere in the country. Part of that is because of the pandemic. Some of it's because of the economy. But I think there's still room for reform here in Harris County, in the state of Texas, despite the challenges that we have. And I encourage and welcome this organization working with others to move us in a direction where we can be responsible stewards of public dollars, but also improve the representation, the safety, and not continue to have the largest mental health ward in the state of Texas, be the Harris County Jail. And with that, I want to go to some questions, if that's okay. And you didn't have to pop back on yet to tell me that I'd gone over 7 minutes.
No, you were great, Commissioner. And for those of y'all that have seen these, I mean, I tell people the hook is I put my video back on, and you weren't even close to being there, Commissioner, on that. There's some coming through. We actually got one asking about, where's the data, where's the metrics? I had the opportunity to read the March report from the independent monitor on that. If you have some thoughts about, having seen it go in and now having seen it happen, where's that from your perspective? Is it doing what it's supposed to be? Are there glitches that you think need to be addressed? Where do you think it is right now?
If I knew how to work this chat room, I'd load it in there. But if somebody just load it in the chat room, and I would encourage you to invite somebody from our monitoring group to come online. They did report to Commissioner's Court on misdemeanor bail, and there were a few minor glitches off the top of my head that may be in my talking points, but I won't go down and pull them. But on misdemeanor bail is working well. On felony bail, I think we're probably at a standstill there. I don't know what's going to happen in Austin, by the way. I assume that whatever they pass will end up being challenged in court, because I think it'll put us in a position where we can follow a federal court settlement or follow whatever the state law says. And the little bit I did learn in law school was that the federal court decree will trump what happens on misdemeanor bail, but we'll end up fighting that out. But I think it's going pretty well.
This is actually from a former Harris County Democratic Party chair. So I'll preface it. I won't name him. Let's see if you can figure out from his question, which is not exactly on topic, but what process does the court expect to appoint a new sheriff, and what's the expected timeline? And see if you can figure out which former chair that was, Commissioner.
That's probably Xavier Burkhart.
Bang. I had a winter chicken dinner. Very
You know,
good.
it's always been in a box, so to speak, to be racially correct. I won't say a black box. It's just been in a box on how things work like that in county government. And I can only talk to one of my colleagues about any given name. So at my age, it's best just not to talk to any of them because I'll forget which one I spoke to. But I'm sure people will start sending in resumes. It'll probably be a fairly informal process. People will be out trying to line up their votes. I'm getting a lot of interest, a lot of interesting names. And I'm assuming that the timetable will be something like June. When I talk to Sheriff Gonzalez, that's his best guess. They go through a process. It'll obviously be public when we go in and have to have a vote. We can discuss names in private. And, you know, sometimes 3 turns into 5, as was the case when I was in the Senate and they had that old rule. It was 2/3 to bring people up, 21 votes, sometimes 21 would turn into 31. But, you know, I think that there will be sensitivity to diversity, but it won't control the process. I think there will be sensitivity to someone who can follow through on what Sheriff Gonzalez was trying to do. I'd consider him one of the more progressive sheriffs in the country. Never will forget when we met with some of us who've been newly elected with the folks who were suing us over misdemeanor bail. Felony bail was not on the table, misdemeanor bail, that the sheriff immediately thought he wanted to remain in that lawsuit and filed an affidavit with the court, with Judge Rosenthal, saying that I don't want the sheriff's office out of this. But his commitment to a alternative responder program on the evening of Floyd's funeral, we've been working with his staff on that. So I at least will be looking, just in terms of my vote. I got a letter from some thoughtful groups who had a list of things that they thought were important for a sheriff. And I just glanced at it. I was on the road, but 80% of it I agreed with. And that will be part of what dictates how I vote. And I hope that other folks will weigh in as well.
So to Ms. Bernberg's question about process, do you anticipate some kind of public portion? When I say public evaluation, some kind of committee, search committee, or what do you anticipate in terms of the process?
I don't really think that there will be a search committee. I mean, each commissioner and the judge will have their own process. People who are interested will be able to send resumes to my office. You know, it's a challenging issue if you had a committee anyway, by the way, because that could be subject to open records. You know, some of my friends who called, I asked them, well, did y'all call, everybody's all excited, did y'all call the mayor when he was picking a police chief? You got me? So here, whatever we do, there will be a committee. It'll be the voters. So this person will serve until the next general election, and you have a primary and a general where they'll get to decide. So I know, Jared, that may not be the answer you wanted to hear, but I don't know that folks would go apply I don't know, we could delegate it to some committee anyway, who would apply if that was going to be subject to open records. You got me?
Gotcha. Thank you for that.
Some people wouldn't apply because their job would know. Their current employer, whether it's the city, the county, or another city, would know that they were applying.
So we got another, and since you're so good so far at this game, it's a former candidate for Senate and then Attorney General who has something that's a little bit outside, but it's something I know that our members are interested in. Is what's your expectation? Not necessarily inside knowledge, but what's your thinking about when the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District might actually get named? Have you got any feel from that? From generally, just birds in the
You ever heard that thing on "Don't Ask, Don't Tell"? You talk about a real black box there. So the way I understand it works, unless the U.S. Senate were to decide they would not recognize the senatorial courtesy, whoever the delegation comes up with, probably more deference to the Democrats in the Texas delegation. So they come up with a list of names. And then the U.S. senators, not senator, not necessarily the senior one, but both have to sign off on the person as well. So they sort of go through this little dance, so to speak. In some places around the country, I'm told that sometimes the next person in line, the interim person may be so obnoxious to the senators, they come up with somebody that would encourage them to look at to try to find a consensus with the delegation. But I don't know what that timetable is going to be.
So no indication. I have actually, and I was able to pull up and I can share, if you hang on 2 secs, that interim report. It has been posted for everybody. And let me make sure if you can see it. Can you see that, Commissioner?
I do see that.
So this is, I guess, what you heard about Commissioner's Court, and it talked about the recidivism and the decline in repeat offenders on the bail with misdemeanor. Is that the kind of progress that you're talking about?
It is.
There was something that caught my eye, and I'm glad that somebody mentioned this. It was talking about a geographic concentration of misdemeanor cases in a small set of low-income neighborhoods has arisen. What do you make of that? In English, I guess what it means is there's a whole lot of misdemeanor arrests in particular low-income neighborhoods that the data revealed. Is that something that surprises you?
No, I mean, my guess is that has always been the case. Sometimes I would assume if somebody who looks like me is in the neighborhood I live in now, as opposed to the neighborhood I came out of, by the way, you may end up in a position where you're more apt to be stopped while driving and being black. You got me? But
you're a driving EWC driving while commissioner as well.
Yeah, unlike when I was with the state and had those SO plates, they may not know who I am until somebody were to stop me. But I assume that has normally been the case, that most of that concentration has been in lower income neighborhoods. I don't know. I would juxtapose that to what it was before. You got me? And I would assume this report, when they did it, was early on in the pandemic. You got me? It could be getting worse. It could be getting better.
Well, at least from the report, it was, I guess, it just looked to compare them to a prior data, because this is the second. So I guess it shows that that's still going on, at least within Harris County, and that particular issue of whether increased enforcement or just sheer bad luck that poor people in certain neighborhoods get arrested more often is still going on, at least from the data. Well, you're missing the hard questions because everybody's.
Let me tell you, although I'm going to meet Reverend Lawson and Bishop Dixon, I'm gonna get on it in my car. Somebody's gonna drive me, so I will be there. And I might get to pop back on, but I just don't know. You froze up a second ago, by the way. I just don't know if I'll freeze up in my car.
I appreciate it, and thank you
let
so
me
much.
back in. Yeah, let me back in. So when I get in my car, I will get on.
Mr. Mullins, Harold Mullins is very good at that. He'll let you back in. Thank you for doing that. We'll see you in about 24 minutes when we have the questions. And thank you, Commissioner. And I want to go ahead to turn now to Geoff Burkhart, who is on there, and we'll see you again for commissioners. So our next panelist is Geoff Burkhart, who I noted is double Jesuit educated between Xavier and Loyola. He's joined the Texas Indigent Defense Commission from the ABA in terms of rubber meets the road, actually figuring out what makes sense to get the folks that need the most in terms of representation. Geoff is really the one that has had the best viewpoint, the best overall view of that. And so we're very happy to have him join us from Austin to visit about what he's seeing in Harris County and across the state. Thank you, Geoff.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for having me here today. So as he said, my name is Geoff Burkhart. I'm the Executive Director of the Texas Indigent Defense Commission. If you are not familiar with TIDC, we really just do three things. We fund indigent defense throughout the state, we oversee indigent defense throughout the state, and we work to improve indigent defense throughout the state. So funding, oversight, and improvement. I know we're approaching the anniversary of George Floyd's death. And there's been a lot of talk about the subsequent trial for the police officer. One of the things that we really focus on at TIDC is not the individuals per se. We really try to look at systems. And I'd submit to you that the problems with criminal justice, whether we're talking about policing or prosecution or defense or the bench, anything else, it's not to say that there aren't bad apples, but I think our problems aren't bad apples. They're not individuals. The problems we have are often systemic or cultural. So give you a couple examples of that. I mean, we put police in an unfair position in a lot of ways. We expect them to do the traditional police officer type work and look at domestic violence cases and murder cases and everything in between. We're also asking them to deal with homelessness and with issues relating to substance abuse and mental health issues. And we pile a lot on police officers' backs, and we don't train them to really deal with that. Similar problems we see in the indigent defense sphere. There are good attorneys and bad attorneys. They're out there, but the big problems we have, I would submit, are really systemic problems and cultural problems. So let me give you some examples of that. We have in Harris County. I think that right now, I was just looking at the numbers on this. The county spends about $58 million on indigent defense every year. $58 million. The vast majority of that, 89% of that, is handled by private attorneys. Now, those private attorneys can be great attorneys individually, but we've not set up systems that really succeed. We haven't set up systems that really support those attorneys. We haven't set up systems that really create independence from the bench for those attorneys. We haven't set up systems that really has any oversight over those attorneys. I would challenge you to figure out, where else do we spend $58 million and we have no real level of oversight? That's taxpayer money that's going out the door, and we don't really know how it's always being spent. Are these attorneys actually visiting their clients? Are they investigating? Are they doing legal research? Are they doing client communication? Do they stop by the jail? And more than that, again, I don't think it's the individual issue. We don't really incentivize them to do that. We don't pay them enough, for instance, in Harris County, for out-of-court costs to do that. So we've not really set up a good system to make sure that they're able to succeed. When we're talking about indigent defense systems, we have a great publication. If you look up the Public Defender Primer, or Public Defense Primer at TIDC, that really aggregates all this research about public defender offices. And what we see again and again in the research is when you have a public defender office, you have greater accountability, you have better outcomes, you have higher quality representation. That's not because there's anything magical about a public defender office. There really isn't. But it's a system that works well. It's a system that works well. You could take a member of the private bar who is a great attorney and put them in a public defender office when it comes to indigent defense cases, and they'd be better supported. And let me give you a few reasons why. I think first is what Commissioner Ellis mentioned, which is independence from the judiciary. When you set up an attorney to have to request an investigator or request an expert, or money for PDEA attorneys or social workers or anything else, to go in front of the very same judge who's hearing that case, you're not setting up that attorney for success. You're not setting up that attorney for success. In a public defender office, the investigators, the social workers, the PDEA attorneys, the paralegals are built into those systems. So it's automatic. And in fact, in the best public defender systems, investigators are not something way off in left field that you have to file a request to get. Investigators are part of the defense team. They're baked into the defense model. Same thing with the social workers. Other examples of this, oversight is built into a public defender office. So we have a greater level of accountability. There's coaching, there's training, there's mentoring built in. Workload caps, so we have limits. One of the issues we've seen a lot in Harris County has been workloads. We have attorneys, there was an attorney last year in Harris County who made $750,000 on indigent defense cases. There is no way to get to that number. There's no way to make $750,000 on indigent defense unless you're taking away too many cases. So public defender offices really cap that. And so we know that those public defenders are doing the basic things that they're supposed to do as a defense attorney. And then again, training, there's an institutional voice there. There are salaries, there are benefits. There are a lot of things that are really built in to make sure that the office is successful and the attorneys are successful. And again, I would submit to you that this is not about members of the private bar being bad attorneys at all. Not at all. I think Harris County has many great private attorneys. The question again is, what is the best system to ensure that when you have tens of thousands of people going through a criminal system, that they're good representation? And again, the research time and again has shown us that that's a public defender office. There's been a lot of, I just want to mention maybe one more thing. There's been a lot of talk about the managed assigned counsel system. Really, it's the same thing, as a public defender. You're really trying to get the same benefits of a public defender office, but for the private bar. And I should say this is just a first note to that the private bar should always be part of an indigent defense system. That they should never go away for a few different reasons. Conflicts, the ebbs and flows of the case numbers. I mean, they absolutely should be part of a good indigent defense system. But when you have private attorneys involved in indigent defense, a managed assigned counsel system really just does three things. First, it creates independence from the judiciary, just like a public defender office. So again, those investigators, the PDEA attorneys, social workers, paralegals, all of that is really baked in to that system. So it's not private attorneys going to a judge to ask for that. It's baked into the system. So that's one, is independence from the judiciary. Two is a greater level of support so that you do have people who can mentor, who can coach, who can provide that CLE. So they're, private members of the private bar aren't left out in the wilderness to their own devices, that there really is some sort of support there. And then finally, there's some level of oversight. Now, it's not the direct supervision that we have in the public defender office, but there is some level of oversight where attorneys are actually making sure that members of the private bar, if you're getting a case, that you actually do visit your client and that you're getting paid for it, that you are able to do legal research, that you're able to investigate and go to the scene and talk to witnesses, that you can get an investigator to figure all that out. So again, a managed assigned counsel system, I know there's a lot of talk about it, but it really just creates independence from the bench, gives better support to the attorneys on the list, and has some level of oversight so that we know that we're wisely spending taxpayer dollars. I think that's the big stuff I want to touch on. Mike, I'm happy to talk about anything else you all want me to address, though.
We will. We're going to save you for questions at the end, right, if that's great. And that's kind of what we needed in terms of kind of the big picture stuff. We'll want some information on what you're seeing kind of on a granular basis on the reports, and maybe your comment on the findings of the first and second reports of the monitor on the bail reform. But we'll come back to you. So thank you so much for sharing that so far. We'll have tough questions for you. I'm actually seeing some of them showing up already. So good.
Good. All right. Sounds good.
Now we have an opportunity to hear from Murray Newman, an active practitioner originally from Bryan College Station. He's also a very, very active blogger that I know for a fact is widely read in the criminal defense bar. And a lot of people pay attention to his thoughts. When I invited Murray, I was suggesting that he can be, I can't remember whether it was Dan Aykroyd or Jane Curtin in the comments, but obviously you have some thoughts that may or may not align with what we've heard, and we really are looking forward to having you share those with us today, Murray, and thank you for joining us.
Well, I appreciate being invited, and when we did our dress rehearsal with the technology yesterday, I was telling Geoff, I don't really think I'm going to be arguing too much with a lot of the principles that are there. The issues that I have, and that a lot of my fellow attorneys who do appointments in the criminal justice system here have are very much detail oriented. Some of the nuts and bolts of what a MAC is going to look like once it's implemented. I don't think that there's any question amongst the defense bar that something needs to be done. The question is just, how do we make those details work in a way that works best for people who are accused of crimes? Because some of the things that I've heard about the reasoning for wanting a MAC are that we want attorneys to get more opportunities to represent people because they're not getting called upon by certain judges. And just in principle, it's not about the attorneys. It's about the people that we're supposed to be representing who are most important. And I think that being a defense attorney especially in felony courts, where I do probably 95% of my work, it's not something where you want to be giving a participation trophy to attorneys. You want people that know what they're doing, that can effectively advise clients who are looking at up to the possibility of losing their lives, certainly their freedom for extended periods of time, the best representation that you can. I think that it goes without saying that for years and years, especially in the juvenile system, which I see some of the people are asking about, that it was just absolute unabashed cronyism. You would have judges who appointed you strictly based on how much you had donated to their campaign. And in some cases, you would literally hear people doing a quid pro quo, like, well, if you want to work in my court, my campaign funds are running a little bit low, and it was unseemly, and it was dirty, and it changed things. I've been practicing law here for 22 years and counting, and just the enormous amount of changes that have gone on in my time here, in which I think that we're absolutely moving in the right direction. It's not as bad as it used to be. And I think that we know what we saw in 2008 when we had almost a complete Democratic sweep, that now we have pretty much, I think it's entirely every single judge on a district or county court criminal bench is a Democrat. And a lot of those judges are my friends. And so I was kind of surprised to see this push for a MAC coming from them, because I said, it's like, you all can finally break free of this cronyism that we've seen for so long, and you want to punt to a MAC to select who your attorneys are going to be. And I jokingly told one of my friends, it's kind of like spiking the ball on the 1 yard line when you're just that close to scoring a touchdown. Because I do think that there is value in judges who know the attorneys that they deal with on a daily basis, and knowing that, oh, this is going to be a really tough case, and this is the type of person that I can call on that because I know that that lawyer is going to do a good job. My understanding of the MAC is that it's going to be a little more automated on some levels, and sometimes, just as I'm sure it is true in any walk of the legal field, there are some attorneys that have better relationships with judges as far as practicing in front of them, and sometimes there are ones that have just absolutely horrendous relationships. For instance, if the MAC were to appoint me to some judge who, let's say I'd filed a grievance against them, and then we couldn't walk in there to that court and effectively represent a client because we're already behind the 8 ball, because the judge hates the lawyer, and you don't want that type of situation. Although I don't have a problem at all with the MAC per se. I think that a lot of what could be done to curb these abuses, where you have the lawyer who's making $750,000, Geoff's absolutely right. That should not be happening. But I think the way that you do that is having the judges voting on who's actually eligible to take appointments, and implementing a case count mandatory minimum that you can actually have. And it needs to be done based on the level of crimes. I mean, I was telling my wife that, I can have 50 state jail felonies that don't equal the amount of work that I would put into one first-degree murder. And so there are a lot of different considerations on that I think that judges in their position have a unique perspective on it. But what really scared, I think, those of us who do appointments, and just to be candid, I do a hybrid of retained cases and appointed cases, is that some of the things that were initially proposed by IDC when they were first talking about this back in 2019. And some of the things that jumped out on us was that really seemed like creating a MAC was basically giving us a second chair that we may not really want or need. And I told Geoff, I haven't seen if there are updated proposals, so forgive me if I'm speaking about something that's no longer a proposal, but one of the things that stuck out in my mind is we do have the public defender's office, which we were afraid of it at first. The defense bar was a little bit afraid of it when it came out, but Alex Bunnan's done a great job of that. I love Alex to death. He's a great guy. They have a great system there with some very reputable attorneys who do work very hard for their clients. But if you create a MAC system and you're going to put someone from the MAC, one of the concerns is that now you have a potential conflict of interest.
Murray, I'm jumping in early. You've used a phrase that some of us know, some of us don't. MAC. Can you explain that? Sorry, you still got plenty of time. Just a translation thing.
Okay, so MAC is the Managed Assigned Counsel
program, which is going to mine, and Geoff, please correct me if I misspeak on this, but they're creating basically another entity that's going to be responsible for the assignment of attorneys to indigent defendants. Right now, as the system currently stands, a judge will get a new case on their docket, say somebody charged with murder, they go to a wheel, or at least supposed to, where 10 names come up, and then the judge says, well, let's appoint that lawyer to this case. It becomes the discretion of the judge for picking what lawyer goes on there. And one of the things that Commissioner Ellis alluded to was that it's bad optics at a minimum, but it could lead to abuses, because the attorney who's supposed to be representing an indigent client feels beholden to the judge who appointed them. And one of the best arguments for a MAC is that it would take that power away from the judge. I think in a theoretical situation, that same murder case ends up in front of that same judge, and the managed assigned counsel, I don't know if you're going to be a bureau or a department or what title they're going to have, will say, well, we are going to go through and we will select who's going to be assigned to that court. And therefore the judge didn't have any say in it. And for those people who do appointments like myself, are a little bit worried about that. I mean, we do tend to have judges who we appear in front of. I obviously not real excited about the idea that anybody would think that me working with a certain judge frequently means that I would forsake my client's interest over the judges. But I do understand how that impression could be made if you're not in there and watching the job that I do. The MAC, though, came with a proposal as they've been working on creating it. And I think it's pretty much a done deal that it's being created for the misdemeanor courts, but it has not been officially adopted for the felony courts yet, because they're still talking about the parameters. And I think that they're still talking about some of the parameters of what it would mean for the misdemeanor courts as well. But there was a proposal that came out back in 2019 when I did a blog post on it, that had some concerns for those of us who feel like we've been attorneys long enough to be old and crotchety about it. And we see one of the things is that they would appoint us a second chair who's from the MAC. One of the first things that springs to mind is, well, doesn't that then mean if you have a case with co-defendants that you potentially have a conflict of interest? If someone's working from the MAC on defendant number one's case, and let's say defendant number two is represented by someone from the public defender's office, but then what do you do if there's a defendant number three who also needs a appointed counsel? I would argue that it's potentially a conflict of interest for the MAC to assign someone else from that entity there. One of the other proposals that was originally made by IDC was that they would decide whether or not I needed an expert or an investigator. And I was like, I think I'm a pretty good judge of whether or not I need an investigator or an expert, because I can tell you that on pretty much every single case that I get an investigator. And if there's something specialized that needs an expert, I get one of those too. And maybe I'm just lucky, but I've never had an issue with the judge granting that. But you file a motion for it, and it's typically granted. I do like the idea that MAC will have some of those people on staff, but then again, you run into a conflict. What if defendant number one needs a psychiatrist to evaluate him? And what he's saying is, and so does number two, so does defendant number two, and they have information about each other. These are some of the little nuanced things that concern me. The original proposal by TIDC also said that they would pick my investigator for me to assign me if I'm doing an appointed case. Well, I have a crotchety old investigator, and he and we bicker a lot, but he does a really good job for me. I don't want somebody else. I'm old and set in my ways when it comes to how I represent someone. And the bigger overarching concern that I did have is that I think that in any legal community that you will see that we know about each other. We know each other's reputations. We know who are good attorneys. We know who are bad attorneys. And we know And the judges know that too, for the most part, I would think, because most of them came from our defense bar. And if a judge says this is going to be a really tough case, and I think that Attorney Smith would be the most qualified to handle that on this list, then who is the MAC to say, well, we think it's Attorney Jones's turn to get a case in your court? You wouldn't do that if you were picking out a heart surgeon. And I don't think you should do it when it comes to an attorney either. And some of the lists that they said that they would do, that the MAC attorneys would serve as functions. Is my time up now?
You're good. This is just we're getting ready for the question and answer. You're perfectly fine. Although I will tell you, Murray, having read your blog, including the most recent one, you're quite a pussycat. I was expecting a little more hard stuff and issues that are concerns that are worth airing to folks that are very engaged in this process. So we'll leave that for the question period.
Well, I was getting to the meat part where I meant I showed that I'm more than just a keyboard warrior, but no. But some of the things that they listed was they were going to have attorneys in court providing feedback. Well, most of the folks at MAC haven't been practicing as long as many of us in the defense bar, and they're also talking about dealing with complaints from client families, is something that's a criteria on judging me. I've been working for myself for 13 years now, and I'm not really interested in having a new supervisor handed to me, whether I like it or not. And I can tell you that families get mad at us a lot, but the defense attorney for an indigent client is like a fireman. We're there to save a life. Sometimes we may break the furniture and we may not be able to salvage everything. We may not do it and do it in a pretty manner, but I think that most of us up there are pretty good at what we're doing, and the MAC is a little bit of an overreach, and it's, to use an old phrase, pole vaulting over mouse turds when it comes to making sure that we have the right assignments.
Thank you, Murray. And now we're going to start the question. Before we actually have the opportunity, and as someone raised in Missouri City, I'm always happy to see someone from Fort Bend County. The district attorney there, Brian Middleton, is able to join us for the question and answer portion. And thank you so much for joining us, District Attorney Middleton. What's your impression so far? I mean, you're seeing what's going on in Harris County. I'll confess I haven't followed as much what's going on in Fort Bend County, but is it afar able to kind of put your 2 cents in without having any repercussions? What do you see of this going on, having practiced in the years in Harris County and Fort Bend County in the past, like we've heard from Murray?
Yeah, I was, at the time they were trying to push this in Fort Bend County, I was the president of the Defense Lawyers Association out here. And we went through an audit by the Texas Commission on Indigent Defense. And, depends on your side of the fight, but at the time we considered it favorable that the audit did not show that we needed a public defender's office at the time. And during that process, we were weighing whether to have a PD's office or having a MAC office. And so I kind of got familiar with the differences between the two. And certainly at the time, if I had an opportunity to choose, I would have chosen the managed assigned counsel. I see benefits in both. And now I'm in a different role. Probably my opinion has changed somewhat. I think it's very critical that defendants have proper and effective representation. I see benefits of having people doing it as a full-time job as public defenders, not being, incentivized by profit. I also see, private defense lawyers being incentivized by profit and doing an even better job because they're making so much money. And then the managed assigned counsel sort of in between. So I think there are pros and cons to each model, but I think as we move forward and we try to improve the process that, I would be open to it in Fort Bend County, as I think some of the defense bar would. But, at the end of the day, it's about providing effective representation, because as the DA, I don't want to try these cases again. So we love and we want attorneys to do a good job, and we're often discouraged when we see ineffective representation. I mean, who wants to slam on a baby goal you know, if we win a trial, we want to win it based on merit and not because, you know, somebody had lousy representation.
Well, thank you. So it sounds like you're right down the middle.
Yeah, I guess that's it. I see the pros and cons on both. I've been on both sides of the problem, and there are disadvantages to each one of those models. So,
Well, and I'll push you a little bit. You had an opportunity, I'm assuming, to practice in Harris County back in what might be called the bad old days. That must have been, you know, somewhat disheartening to kind of see the way that the system worked. And, you know, this is a partisan group, so we get to say it sounds like Democratic judges at least ended some of those worst abuses for the most part. But in terms of either the MAC and kind of the oversight of the criminal defense bar, I get it. Nobody wants to have a boss, but do you see some real good effects of that overall for the system?
For the system, right? I mean, you know, my understanding of the MAC model, I'm not necessarily sure I would call it a boss. I would see it sort of as an overseer, kind of like a legal assistant in a private office, making sure deadlines are being kept. That's my understanding of the model. So if everybody is exerting best efforts, you know, you're still your own boss. And other thing that I would say that a MAC system should have is an efficient way for lawyers to get paid. One of the frustrations of being on the defense side is waiting for months to get paid. Now that was never really a big issue in Harris County, but in Fort Bend County, it would take you months to get paid after you spent 100 hours on a case. And it was always, I thought, discouraging and a disincentive. So if a MAC system could improve the payment process, I think everybody benefits. You have happier lawyers because, you know, it's hell putting in all that time and then having wait to get paid and your bills still coming due. And you're waiting on some bureaucrat to sign off on something. So, you know, if we can improve all sides of it, I think that it would be great. But, you know, lawyers have to maintain their, you know, their autonomy. So any system is going to have to defer to, you know, strategy of you know, assigned counsel. So I'm not so sure I would call it as, you know, being, you know, a supervisor.
Thank you, sir. So that actually, I'd like to focus this one on, and we have some questions coming up on Geoff. One of the things that caught my attention was the metrics that this MAC system has. In other words, you can measure things like when somebody visits somebody in jail. I mean, is that something that is easily transferable, able to be through? And how do y'all do that? And how can, because that's I think very interesting and very an opportunity to identify problems and issues and maybe good things. So tell us a little bit about that, Geoff, that process.
Yeah, you know, there are a lot of managed assigned counsel systems that build in a data analyst into that team, and they track things like that, like client communication, filing motions and things like that. And you get a good sense of the system in the aggregate, right? And Murray, I mean, I hear a lot of your concerns. I think some of it I hadn't heard before, that they would automatically assign a second chair. I haven't heard that. Other bits that you're talking about, I think, ring true. But the one thing that, Murray, you said toward the beginning that I think we all agree on is it's not about the attorneys, right? I mean, this is, at the end of the day, this really is about the clients. And Murray, I think you're exactly right. So when you spend, again, like Harris County does, $58 million a year on indigent defense, that's taxpayer dollars. There ought to be some level of oversight, and there ought to be some element of data tracking. We should know what's going on with that money. So, Mike, to your point, I think a data analyst is really important. The other bit to this, you know, I mean, I think things have gotten better, and I realize I'm talking to an audience of Democrats and lawyers, so I'll be careful about this. But Democrats take.
I'm looking for some excitement today, so go ahead.
Oh, good. Well, I'll say this: Democrats taking the bench hasn't solved the problem. It just hasn't. I mean, and again, this is not the individuals. This is a problem of the system, right? A system that we've set up. And as long as you have judges controlling appointments, as long as you have judges controlling who gets an investigator and who doesn't, as long as you have judges, you know, attorneys contributing to campaigns, or judges who are concerned about being primaried by a member of the defense bar, you have a bad system. At the very least, you have the perception of cronyism, if not actual cronyism. So I think there's still a danger in the way the system's set up right now. I don't want to, you know, I'm not a MAC evangelist. I'm not here to say that the MAC will solve all your problems, but I think it's going to solve a lot of them.
So we do have a question that I think, and I'll throw this out for whoever wants to grab it. We haven't talked about the juvenile justice system where, you know, a lot goes on, and a lot goes on that kind of goes out of public view because of the nature of the proceedings, which is reasonable, but also means that stuff can go on that shouldn't go on. So I'll throw that out for anybody. This whole indigent defense and the system on the juvenile courts, how is that impacting? How is that expanding? Does it need to be applied, and where we're at on that? Murray, do you have any questions or comments on that?
I would venture to say, because we're actually ending in Harris County our first term with new Democratic judges. I believe that they're all on the 22. Yeah, I think they're on the 22 election. But so they're all wrapping up their first term. But before that, it was all Republicans, and I don't think it's any exaggeration to say what was going on in there was pretty horrific. I mean, I had a defense attorney just tell me to my face, like, I just want to do juvenile law because that way I only have to contribute to three judges instead of 22. And that was the system that worked. I knew of extremely qualified juvenile board certified lawyers that couldn't even get on the appointment list. And so, I mean, I think that system has gotten immeasurably better with the new judges. But I do think that obviously they are the ones that have to implement their procedures, but I don't see how MAC would hurt that any worse than it. None of my concerns are specific to how it would work within the juvenile system.
Geoff, what are your thoughts on it? Because you're not involved in that at this point, but that obviously is an area where the commission has I would think some job to do, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. That's part of our mandate is looking at juvenile cases. And I think, Murray, you're spot on. I mean, I think that we've seen big improvements in the juvenile system there. Again, I see it as a systemic problem, right? I mean, you know, we have, you know, you talked about that kind of cronyism in the bad old days, right? Where you had to pay 3 judges instead of 22 or 16 to get cases. That's certainly gotten better. I don't know that it's been that the issue is solved. Again, we have judges who are still controlling the appointment process. We have other issues there in terms of training. I mean, if you look at, for instance, the National Juvenile Defender Center, they have a great program. They do JTIP certified attorneys. JTIP is Juvenile Training Immersion Program. You look at other states the size of Texas, I know there aren't many, but you have a few dozen attorneys who have this kind of national certification in most of these states. Texas has 4. I mean, we don't have the same level of training in the juvenile context that we see in other states. Again, the appointment system is not the system I think any of us would want. And I think that the judges who've taken the bench have certainly helped. The individuals there are great, but again, the system still could use some change.
So what are y'all going to do about it?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, one is that we came out with a monitoring report, and most of our monitoring really looks at front-end processes. It looks at access to counsel and appointment systems and things like that. All of that's going to be available on our website probably in about a month. So we did a monitoring report in 2016. We did just a follow-up one that'll be released, like I said, about a month from now. And it kind of tags a lot of these issues in terms of appointment of counsel, front-end processes. And for the first time, we're actually looking at issues related to the quality of counsel. So looking at excessive caseloads, how many attorneys have too many cases to do a good job? Client communication, things like that. So certainly, we have the report, and we also do a lot of funding. The public defender office that Murray, I think you're spot on. I think when that public defender office came about 11 years ago, there were a lot of people in the private bar who didn't want it, and change is hard. It's just hard. Now that it's there, I don't think anybody would want to get rid of it. I think it's raised the level of representation. And I think the MAC is going to do the same thing. And certainly a MAC could, as Murray said, could cover juvenile cases as well.
So more studies, more money.
Yes, sir.
Got it. Well, no, that's reasonable. I get it. So District Attorney Middleton, I mean, in Fort Bend County, I don't believe they have separate juvenile courts, but I could be wrong. Is that something, because that's always kind of been a hidden sore in many respects. I've had 1 or 2 pro bono cases. I was down in Harris County back in the bad days and kind of couldn't believe it was a real court in a way. But is that something that you see as an issue that needs to be addressed as well, and how? Yeah,
I mean, the way our indigent defense system works in Fort Bend County with juveniles, it's a smaller list. The standards to get on that list are higher. And what goes on in those courts, in Fort Bend, our county courts at law have juvenile jurisdiction. So although they're general jurisdiction. County courts, they are, you know, they have juvenile jurisdiction. And what I've seen is that you have a smaller list, better qualified lawyers. But what's going on in the courts is, you know, the focus is on trying to help rehabilitate the child. So the juvenile process is less adversarial. So you find out what the needs of the child are, and you work towards trying to build a program to rehabilitate the child. Now, as they reoffend, then that changes. But you know, I guess that there's a need for accountability for these children, but I think the courts and the juvenile probation department's involvement already provide a lot of checks and balances. The fact that these cases are dealt with on an expedited basis also is a different dynamic that you have compared to adults. So I think that just the way the process is set up, it's got more protections in it than it would have than the adult system.
Well, and it sounds like Fort Bend County, because it's not quite as big as Harris County, obviously,
Right.
it works better in that respect, which is, I'm glad to hear that. Well, I don't think we're getting back Commissioner Ellis, or maybe he is, and he's just staying muted. And he's dodging the questions that we might have at this point. But I think it's about time, you know, if there's any final closing thoughts. I know that District Attorney Middleton, you're going to be joining us at the Zaza on the 24th. Thank you. We're going to look for something, a topic I think that'll be very engaging for our folks. Is there any kind of final on these issues? I mean, getting to look at Harris County, you know, what's the, I think we've used this before, the chicken's instant breakfast, the hog's committed. So you get kind of look on as the breakfast, as the chicken at this point outside of Harris County. Do you have any thoughts on how it's working and what you see that seems to be working best from your perspective that you want to close with?
You know, it's kind of hard for me to speak to that because I haven't been practicing out there in the last few years. But from what I'm hearing, there's a lot of change going on. There's a lot of growth, and it's evolving. And from what I'm hearing in terms of the people involved, I think you have the right people at the table. So I'm optimistic that whatever comes out of it, it will be a good thing. And if not, then there's an opportunity to change it. So I'm optimistic from what I can tell.
Thank you, and thank you for the last minute opportunity to join us on that. Geoff, last closing thoughts. You kept mentioning J-tip. It almost, you know, for the juvenile, I think I keep thinking of a bris. I don't know why. But tell us a little bit about, you know, closing thoughts, things you're thinking about, whether J-tip or otherwise, that are engaging at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to applaud Harris County for all the work y'all are doing. I agree with Brian that, Mr. Middleton, that, gosh, the changes y'all are making are tremendous. You know, the creation of a public defender office 10 years ago, the MAC now, you know, there's talk about kind of revamping some of the front end processes for better appointment. And again, avoiding that appearance of cronyism. I think things are only going in the right direction, and we're happy to keep on working with y'all and helping to fund stuff and helping out wherever we can.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Finally, Murray, you know, you want to continue some more happy talk, go ahead. And I'm just kidding you. Thank you very much for this. This has been educational. I think particularly for those of us that are civil mostly, it's interesting to see how well things are working and really the tremendous good changes that in large part, I think the Democrats can take credit for on there. But go ahead, Murray, what's your closing thoughts?
I would just say, you know, that as a defense attorney, you travel all over Texas and you see a lot of counties that you can't believe that actually make you realize that you're fortunate to be in Harris County. I'm not talking about Fort Bend. Fort Bend's fantastic to be in.
I know you didn't want to say anything mean to anybody.
So it's actually a delight to go to Fort Bend now. And I'm not just saying that because Brian's my friend. He's really, it's a great place to work for him, and it's a great place to practice too. But I do think that absolutely that Harris County is traveling in the right direction. And if you need a reminder of that, travel to some of the smaller counties outside of it that act like they've never followed the law or paid attention to it. And I look forward to practicing for many more years and watching it continue on that path.
Well, thank you all for joining us. I really hope you all can join us in District Attorney Middleton, June 24th at Zaza. The registration, we've already sent it a save the date. The registration is going out. This is probably going to be the first big event that's going to be open for live attendance. And I think it's going to be a really good opportunity and great honorees. And thank you all for joining us. This is recorded. If you share it, please do. And we'll see you all in person next month at the Zaza. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mike.